Hello, picture book creators. Welcome to the channel. Have you been struggling to organize your story and your illustrations and simply get it out into the world and officially published? If you've been feeling disorganized and you're struggling to just sort of get over the mountain of what I call the pre-production of a picture book, this video is for you because I'm going to give you a very concise overview on my pre-production process of how I take a picture book from manuscript to publishing through the journey of dividing up that manuscript, pacing the story, storyboarding, how I actually view the thumbnail sketches and choose the style of illustrations. I'm also going to talk to you about some of the tech of how I export from my iPad and get it into Photoshop and then finally into InDesign. Yes, I am going to be talking about Adobe products that I use. I'm not affiliated or sponsored in any way. It's a product that I've used for years, but I will also give you some alternatives. And really, this is going to be kind of as fast as I can present to you my entire pre-production workflow in a way that you can grasp it and begin to organize your workflow. I want to empower you to get this book done. So basically, the pre-production process is everything that I just described to you, from manuscript to that final PDF that you'd get out there, in my case, uploaded onto Kindle Direct Publishing, which is how I sell my picture books on Amazon. Let's start with a quick overview of the importance of storyboarding, because if you're not already in the practice of storyboarding, whether you're the writer and or the illustrator, if you're not storyboarding, then you're already disorganized, okay? So I wanna tell you about the importance and point you to two videos that I have. One is for storyboarding analog, which is pen to paper kind of storyboarding, and then the other is a series of videos that I have for digital storyboarding. One where I show the template that I set up in Procreate on my iPad, and the second where I take you inside of my entire full-length process of storyboarding with 3 different templates and a process of, you can check out the video. So analog storyboarding is where I often start, especially to divide my manuscript and get a feel for the story's pacing. So dividing the manuscript is a very essential building block to starting off your entire picture book. So this is the insight I really want to get across for dividing up your manuscript. If you are publishing a 32-page picture book, which is the picture book size and length that I typically publish, it isn't entirely for the story. Your front and back matter take up 4 to 6 pages. And so that leaves you with about 26 to 28 pages for the main content. And that means you need to divide up the manuscript accordingly. You need to divide up the manuscript into 26 to 28 different segments, not 32. And I do see that as being, a downfall that some beginners will do, is think, I have a 32-page picture book, I need 32 sections of text. I print my manuscript and I break it into sections. I actually print out a hard copy and I cut it up and break it into sections, matching each piece of text to a page or spread, and beginning to think and daydream on what illustrations might go well with that text. This is called pacing the story, and pacing the story is key. Here's how I divide my story, okay? So as I mentioned, we have front matter and we have back matter. But in between that, every story, every well-written story has a beginning, middle, and end. Your beginning is your world building, the scene setting, the character introduction. Your middle is where the conflict builds into a climax, and basically the problem is really huge in the middle of the book, and maybe solutions are started to be thought of. And then at the end of the book is where we resolve the story with a satisfying conclusion. So I work with a general rule of thumb of how I divide up the pacing of a picture book. I give 1/4 of the book pages to the beginning. I give 1/2 of the book pages to the middle and 1/4 of the book pages to the end. But we need to bear in mind that in a 32-page picture book, there's going to be front matter and back matter that need to be subtracted from the pages. So you're left with about 26 to 28 pages, and you're going to have to account for where the front matter and back matter fall. So this for me means that around pages 5 to 10, I am doing the beginning world building of the book. From about pages 11 to 23, I'm developing the conflict and building the climax. From about pages 24 to 29, I'm resolving the story into the satisfying conclusion, and the world resolves and comes back to this glorious state. And I make my thumbnail sketches and my writing align with that basic rule of thumb. Now, there are always exceptions to every rule, but this is a basic formula that I can follow, and it helps me to stay really organized with the pacing of my book. For my thumbnail sketches, I use the 32-page template to sketch the simple thumbnails. I show you that in another video that I highly recommend, but these are rough ideas where the text and illustrations might go. This step helps me to balance the double page spreads, single page illustrations, and smaller moments like the vignettes, and get a feel for the flow of the overall book. Okay, so this is essentially my digital storyboarding process, and I typically do this in Procreate on my iPad. Once I have that general idea of the layout and the pacing, I move into Procreate for the digital storyboarding. I have a template marked in Procreate that I duplicate and rename for every project that I'm working on. So essentially, I never do art in my template. I try not to. And I duplicate it and rename. And I set up that template for that particular picture book. I have an imported JPEG of a 32-page storybook printable that I have here on Picture Book Creators for you. It's available. Check out links. Each page or spread gets its own layer for sketching. And then this helps me keep everything organized. So I sketch out these thumbnails. It helps me to experiment with the text placement, the composition, the illustration types, and these digital tools. I toggle between like a big picture view of the whole book, and I zoom in to more specific detail. Why does this digital form of storyboarding work for me? It really helps me to delete layers, move things around, and I'm not committed quite as much as when I'm pencil to paper and needing to use the eraser. So I prefer digital storyboarding. It's also really great for rearranging things and duplicating projects if I don't want to lose a past draft. So then I need to bring this illustration to life, okay? I need to take what's on the storyboard, what I've decided is going to be the flow of the story, and I need to bring it to life and start actually rendering these illustrations. Now, whether you're an analog creator like paint, pencil to paper, however you render, or whether you're digital, this is a step you're gonna need to take. I have been illustrating mainly digital for quite some time now, and so I use a process of creating important pieces of my illustrations as separate elements. I create individual Procreate files for key elements like a character or a certain prop or a certain, embellishment of a page. And this allows me to reuse these pieces for promotional materials later because I create them in a larger file, and I can then use them to piece together, for example, posters and stickers, and I can use them later without affecting the full page or without having rendered a butterfly really tiny on a full page. It can be rendered really large on its own file and then made tiny later on the full page, and I still have that butterfly as something I can use later. I will then assemble the pages using a page template. So if I have a bunch of different elements that I've created, for example, this donkey and this butterfly and this tree need to all be combined into a double page spread, I will then drag them as a merged layer. I'll first merge them in Procreate and drag them over into an assembly page. And this assembly page has been set up as a template with a bleed and with a marker that shows me the crease of the book. It's a layer that I turn off later before I export. And I use this page template to arrange all of the elements in the complete spread, but I also add shadows and highlights and final artistic touches. I am always doing art within the page itself. And I do all this to maintain a flow. So essentially it goes from thumbnail to creating elements to moving them into pages and doing the artistic touches on the pages. Once I have a page done, it's time to start formatting for the publication. And my process is using, of course, I've already illustrated in Procreate on the iPad, so I need to get it from the iPad to my desktop, where I use Adobe products, Photoshop, and InDesign to do the final export of my book PDF. If you don't use Adobe products and you're looking for an alternative to the Adobe products, what you'll do today is you'll Google alternative to Photoshop, alternative to InDesign, and there are plethoras of alternatives that you can use in your process if you don't want to use the same tech as I do. I'm going to be showing you in the tech that I use, but you are not stuck to using this tech, and I'm not sponsored or affiliated with any of this tech that I'm about to mention. So the first thing that I need to do is get my files from Procreate on the iPad onto my desktop, and how I do that is I export them as a PSD file, which is a file that is in layers, and it is a Photoshop file. So it's essentially a file that I can open on the desktop in Photoshop and see all my layers intact the way that I created them in Procreate. And so how I do that transfer is I transfer out of my Procreate on the iPad into a Google Drive file that's really easy to access. I call it my transfer folder, and I transfer into there. And then once the transfer is completed from Procreate as a PSD file, I will then move and actually sit at my desktop, open my Google Drive on my desktop, and download that PSD file and file it in a book folder here on my desktop. And that's where I can open that file in Photoshop. And at that time, I make final adjustments directly in Photoshop on the desktop. It gives me a little more control of the layers. I'm able to see them on my big monitor. When those files are ready, I do save them as a JPEG in the book folder that I'm working on. So I'll export them out of Photoshop as a JPEG. At that point, that JPEG is then placed into InDesign, where I have a template for my picture books. Very similarly to how I have templates set up on Procreate, I have templates made in InDesign with the bleed already built in. And essentially, I open up the template, I rename it, I save it as the book that I'm working on, and then I begin to import, or in InDesign it's called placing in, the different JPEGs into the pages that I want them in InDesign. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if this is where I'm going to start placing my text, I have already done a search and made a choice of the font that I'm using. Please see a font video and how to choose font and how to choose the correct licenses for your font. That's a really helpful video. At the point where I have finalized everything in InDesign, I have all of my JPEGs placed in on the pages that I want them and everything's looking good, I then export my book as a print-ready PDF with the bleed and trim size settings, and I then have my book, my PDF book, that I can upload onto Kindle Direct Publishing. If you're interested in seeing or hearing what happens next after that, I have videos showing how I order proof copies, what I'm looking for in the proof author copies, and so forth. But what I've described here today in this video is the pre-production of my storybook, dividing that manuscript properly and kind of sectioning it out into rule of thumb divisions in the picture book page layout, all the way up until how I transferred onto my computer, look over everything, and turn it into the final PDF with the text and the formatting. So whether you prefer working analog, digital, or a mix of both, the key is to stay organized and to create a workflow and a pre-production flow that guides you and helps you get over this mountain, because there are a lot of different aspects of storybook creation to stay organized on. I hope this video has helped you. If it has, be sure to hit the like, comment, and share. I'd love to hear your own process below, or any tips that you feel like you want to contribute to the community that I may have even overlooked a little bit of workflow information that you want to share. So please feel free to comment and share with us and get involved in the picture book creators community. Don't forget to subscribe for more tips and check out the other videos here on the channel. Happy creating, picture book creators.